Hey, what's happening, everybody? Robert Phoenix talking to you live from Fredericksburg. Let's see, we got, is that Judy in there? There's Sue's got a full moon fire burning for, oh, yeah, we got that full moon in Scorpio. Mars in the seventh house of vice work. Thanks, Robert. I'm here for you. I'm here. You're welcome. You're welcome. So what's going on out there? We're going to have a big, fat, full moon tonight. Hey, Farrah Jade. Nice to see you here. And great email you sent me. Thank you for the email. I really appreciate it. And probe some soul searching for me. Hi, Tony. There's Judy. What's going on, Judy? How are you? How is everybody out there in this crazy, whacked out world? There's Maury. What's going on, Mr. D? Are you getting enough duality? The duality thing is really full on, isn't it? Right? We can discuss some of that tonight. There's a magical, dark magical operation going on with duality right now. It's quite interesting. We can get into that. We'll wait for a few more people to show up just to see what we have go. It's beautiful here tonight. Dawn is currently busy, but I will send her the link anyways. All right. Well, bring her on in when she's ready to show up. Not a lot of chemtrails, manageable, but it really seems like the chemtrail thing is starting to move to the front burner. I was on, been spending a lot of time on Twitter. I've been trying to get a vibe for Twitter. It's like I've ditched Facebook for a while. Now I'm spending time on Twitter. It's like dropping like nicotine for alcohol or something like that. Hi, Sally. So I've been spending some time on Twitter. Twitter's, when Twitter first came out, I was all over it, and I had a lot of posts, and it was great. I was digging Twitter. But the problem with Twitter is that it's Twitter. No, there's Lynn. What's going on, Lynn? The problem with Twitter is that it's Twitter, and on the one hand, it's a really interesting, blast of, hey, there's Heather. Hi, Heather. Of information in a way that, we hadn't really experienced before. Like, you can interact with people who are theoretically famous, right, with Twitter. And it broke down that wall. And you could, the bad news about Twitter. There's Matt. Hey, Matt. There's Anna. Hi, Anna. The bad news about Twitter is that it has set in motion trolling. Like, the great thing that's come out of Twitter is memes. Memes are incredible, right? They're really funny. Memes are like meta advertising for the 21st century. But it's also created trolling. And I was watching the NFL draft this weekend, and it was in Dallas. Hey, Joe, what's happening? It was in Dallas. And last year during the NFL draft in Philadelphia, there was a guy for the Cowboys. He used to play the Cowboys named Drew Pearson. And Drew Pearson broke the fifth wall with that draft. He totally broke the fifth wall. And before, they'd have draft picks and people would go up there and they'd say, hi, representing the such and such team, I'm so-and-so. And in the third round with the 51st pick, we pick so-and-so and so-and-so. And that's really what it was. But Drew Pearson took on the city of Philadelphia. And he ripped them a new one because he used to play with the Cowboys, right? Now I got to plug this in. It would help if I plug this in. You'd probably hear me better. Hold on. And he used to play with the Cowboys. And then what happened yesterday over the whole weekend when I was watching the draft is that you had all these people who were coming up and presenting and announcing the draft pick, and they were going after the city of Dallas and the Cowboys. And if you hated the Cowboys, you hated Texas, you loved it. It was like great. It's like, great, stick it in, stick the knife in there. But it's really become a condition that is really prevalent in our society now. And again, I didn't see like what happened with what's her name, Julia Wolf, who was at the reporters roast in Washington D.C. and she ripped Sarah Sanders Huckabee a new one, and the left got on it. It's like they're holding her up like she's a hero, and the right is like, how could you be so vicious? And this is indicative of the. I mean, we just keep going back and forth with this stuff all the time now. It's almost like, what do they have with 1984? Was it 10 minutes of hate? Is that what it was? 10 minutes of hate. So they'd like, this is the emotions that are supported now. It's like we live in this rapid fire succession of gotcha moments fueled by antipathy and hate for one side or the other. This is what I mean. I'm blown away. And I saw it at the pro football draft. It was like, yeah, it's all good. It's all good. It's all fun. But on some level, it's not. It is not fun and it is not good. And I'm not being a stick in the mud, and I'm not being, Mr. New Age positive, because I like to pull the rug out from under things. But I see this culture of trolling that Twitter has created, and it's now permeating throughout our society. And I'll give you another example. This whole Joy Reid thing. I'm going to talk about this tomorrow. We'll get into some astrology tonight. We'll talk this whole Joy Reid thing. Joy Reid had a whole series of posts that were apparently virulent, homophobic, racist. Here's the right, because Joy Reid has really gone after Trump and has gone after the right, and all of a sudden they found something on her, and it's now this gotcha moment. We got you. We found shit. Yeah, Charles says 2 weeks off. It's true. That's the other side of it, because there'll be somebody else now that come up with a new gotcha moment and a new 10 minutes of hate, and this is what's circulating through our society now. Who's this? Santa Monica. Should I bring him on the show? See who's calling. Hello? Hey, Christopher, what's happening? What? From who? Okay, can we talk later? Okay, let me call you after the show. No worries. Okay, bye. Okay, well, that was not great news, but we'll soldier on and we will continue with our show here. There's Jasper jumping in. Anyway, we are at an interesting point in time where everybody's looking for a gotcha moment, and I'm not sure how great it is. The other thing that I've seen here is this duality piece, which might be part of it. And what we have is on the one hand, we have what happened with Bill Cosby, which is totally strange, right? It's a total strange trip with Bill Cosby. Total strange trip. What's really weird about the whole Cosby thing, what did Drew Pearson do? Oh, he ripped Philly a new asshole. So hold on a second. Gotta get Jasper down. So what happened with the whole Cosby thing, obviously, is, he's going to go to jail. And, you look at Bill Cosby and then you look at Bill Clinton and you see like two separate people, right? They're two separate people, but they're doing and have been engaged in similar acts, right? Bill Clinton was accused of rape. Bill Cosby accused of rape. One guy goes to jail and one guy doesn't. One guy's black and one guy's white. So what do we have? We have a duality trip, total duality trip going on. And that's just part of it, right? And then we have Bill Clinton. I'm sorry, not Bill Clinton, but Donald Trump and Kanye, two Geminis, another black and white duality scene. There's some kind of underlying like operation going on here. Some kind of underlying operation on a duality level, duality scheme. So this is kind of an interesting backdrop. That's what I wanted to say. All right, so why don't we get into some astrology tonight? Let's find out where we are, and we're gonna look at a chart, and it's the chart of Bernie Madoff. Okay, so I'm gonna go to astro.com, and I'm gonna grab the link, and hopefully it shows up. They've got these super long links, and here we go. Let's do this. Let me get into the chat room. Oh, there's Jasper. Yes, Maurice is right. It's just the surface of things. It's a long link. Why don't you guys? It's almost too long. If you go to let me go to maybe Astro theme. That might be a better link. Let me clear this out. Jasper will not be denied. He always shows up here. Okay. All right, so go to, let me just find this here. Hold on. Here we go. Give me one sec, Jasper. By the way, Jasper's available for parties, weddings, and bar mitzvahs. If you want to bring him onto your show here. Hold on, let me just drop this in here. Okay, there we go. It's a cleaner link. We'll be able to look at that a little bit later. So why don't we get into what's going on with the old stars up there? We got a full moon in Scorpio. How's everybody doing with the full moon? Oh man, go here. Let me get into this. Okay, so right now we're at the apex of the full moon, and it is exact. It is totally exact, and I'm telling you, man, the moon and the house that it shows up in this transit is going to give you some information about your life. Okay, information about your life. Shall we go through each and every house with the full moon? All right, transiting full moon in Scorpio. It's going to shine a light on who you are. It's going to shine a light on here's the deal, right? The Scorpio full moon. It's in its fall. So, it's not always going to be real productive or real positive. That's the nature of the Scorpio full moon. It's not going to be real positive. I mean, ultimately, if it's there to extract some muck from the bottom of your personal pond, it is not always going to look positive on the surface, because Scorpio is a dark sign. And what is the Scorpio moon going to do? It is going to dredge up emotional, for all intents and purposes, darkness, or it's going to dredge up, for all intents and purposes, emotional, shadowy material. Some instances, it might even have something to do with maternal figures in your life. That's quite possible. So if it's in the first house, what are you dealing with? Well, first of all, you're dealing with some level of compulsion, obsession, and intensity. That is the nature of Scorpio in general, right? Scorpio does nothing halfway. It does, there's no gray area with Scorpio. So in the first house, you're going to deal with some level of desire, and especially because if you've got transiting Sun through your seventh house, it could be a very interesting time in terms of what kind of deeper, darker emotions that are floating around the surface as it relates to relationship. Because what the full moon in Scorpio is always going to do is it's always going to give us some kind of revelation, right? Some kind of generally some dark revelation. And people have moon in Scorpio in their charts. God bless them. I mean, it's almost like a master's class in some ways. It's because people who have Scorpio moon have such a regenerative and powerful and intense kind of energy, but they have a very difficult time of letting go. And especially when it comes to intimacy and sex, because they feel so deeply. And this is where that whole idea that people with Scorpio moons tend to be jealous, that they're jealous people. And, that's the nature of it. That's the nature of the Scorpio moon, like in a nutshell. A very small little, postage stamp version of it. And there's more, obviously, when people go through the sort of the esoteric ritual of the Scorpio moon, it's about being able to let go in those very tight and intense situations. That's the nature of it. It's about being able to let go. And what happens when a Scorpio moon person begins to let go and learn how to let go, it's a pretty profound experience. And everything that anchored them and rooted them to some kind of psychic attachment, which is very deep with the Scorpio moon, is released. And then the Scorpio moon has the opportunity to be quite transformative and can be regenerative as well. And that's the lesson of the Scorpio moon. It's a tough one, though. So people of Scorpio moons are also great at manifestation. They're really good at manifestation. If they can manifest at a high level, even better. Okay, so we're talking about the illumination of Scorpio in the first house with the individual. Now we have the moon going into the second house, transiting, going through the second house. And that's illuminating your attachments to money, to things that are physical and material. And again, if you are kind of resolved with that, this is going to happen once a year. So it's kind of like a check-in, right? Checking in. But sometimes there are events in your life that are not just about checking in, that they're actually about something very concurrent happening. And all of a sudden that full moon, represents some kind of revelation, right? Some kind of revelation. So in the second house, which is the opposite of Scorpio's house, that could be a time when, you can look at your finances. You can have a very illuminated look at what's going on in your life, how much you owe, what you owe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all that stuff. Scorpio moon in the third house. Now we're talking, this is a mental house now. This is Gemini's house. Thinking, sharing ideas, communication, the world around you, brothers and sisters. Again, there's going to be some form of illumination. Like, how are you thinking? Where is your thinking clouded? Where is your thinking too emotional? Are there ideas or thoughts that you need to let go of? And in some rare instances, there could be a revelation of what's going on between you and members of your family. It's not just brothers and sisters. It can also be cousins, nephews. And that dark Scorpio moon, which is illuminated, comes up. And there's material there to deal with. Now, how we deal with this theoretically is on the other side, which is Taurus. That's going to be about solidity. It's going to be, in this case, be ninth house, taking a higher perspective, a higher objective, or an objective view. Transiting Scorpio moon in the 4th house has to do with your home. And not just your home, but the emotional influence that you have in your life and kind of how it's accrued to this point in time. So, if you're dealing with moon and Scorpio moving through your 4th house, it's not just kind of where you are, although that can be indicative of it. And this would be a really good time for you to look around where you live. What kind of changes can you make? Where can you get solid with Taurus on the other side of it? How can you transform your living space? This is a pretty important and powerful aspect, because anytime there's a full moon going through one of the 4 cardinal points of the chart, 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th house, in a lot of ways, it's really radiating outwards towards that next quadrant that it's moving into. So if you've got the Scorpio moon in your 4th house, it's really radiating from your 4th house to your 7th house, inclusive of the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, and then to some degree the 7th. And then, of course, the opposite sign. So, but it also will take you back in time, and it would also get you to think about and look at the influences, some of which may not be pretty, by the way. They may not be pretty. Now, over the course of the next couple, by tomorrow, the moon is going to conjunct Jupiter. And that'll be, again, expanding on the potential of the moon's intensity and darkness. So it's not just any old Scorpio moon. Keep that in mind. Okay. It's important. You have Scorpio moon in the 5th house. Where is that going to go? Well, it's going to go into your house that relates to children and creativity, play, romance, all those things we think of the 5th house. And for people who are having issues with their children, or sometimes that Scorpio moon can be very, very powerful and not always fun in the 5th house. If you're in a romance, you could get into some serious intensity with Scorpio moon in the 5th house. It's not necessarily a bad influence, but you're going to have to deal with the intensity of desire. And sometimes there's compulsion, with the Scorpio moon in the 5th, but it could also be regenerative in terms of romance and other things that are associated with it. As it relates to children, it may even take you back to your child, because remember, the moon, whatever sign it's in, the moon is a rule of Cancer, and Cancer tends to be sentimental and looking backwards. So this could be a time where through the Scorpio moon, you might look at your childhood and get into it emotionally and find out, maybe there's some dark shadows in there that you want to shine a little light on. In the 6th house, the Scorpio moon is going to get into your work, your purpose, your dharma, your health. And you may find yourself looking at the attachment that you have to what you do, for better or worse. And because ultimately what we do with this Scorpio moon is on us, and how we deal with our emotions and how we deal with our psychology and sort of the psychic impact and effect on it. So there's always an element of transformation that's available. I think Jasper needs his own YouTube channel. Don't you think? I mean, it's uncanny. It's totally uncanny. Where's the Scorpio moon in your house? What house is a Scorpio moon in your chart, Jasper? What sign do you think Jasper is? I think we picked him up in, 2010 in the springtime. I think Jasper might be an Aries or a Taurus. That's my sense. Scorpio moon in the 7th house, you're dealing with relationships. And you're dealing with the shadow of relationships. You're dealing with the shadow, the darkness, the intensity of relationships. This is what's happening with the Scorpio moon. Okay, this is what's going on. Scorpio moon in the 8th house. Well, it's in its own house, at least. That's like a lurid love affair with Scorpio moon in the 8th. But again, other people's money, your legacy, Your own fears. A lot of fears come up. The houses where the fears come up are what houses? 12th house, 8th house, second house generates fear. Those are the three big fear houses as far as I'm concerned. The 12th house is existential fear. The second house is the fear of like losing everything. And the 8th house is like the fear of, in a lot of ways, death and the unknown. So when you have the Scorpio moon going through your 8th house, it could engender some of those kinds of feelings, and it's okay to go through. One of the things that astrology can be really good for is triggering creativity and how you deal with something like a very intense Scorpio moon. So maybe write a poem, short story, paint, make some music, dance. That's what you can do. Scorpio moon in the 9th house, you're dealing with Sagittarius, higher consciousness, people from other countries, transiting through there, looking at your belief systems. That's a big one for the 8th house. Does the Scorpio moon illuminate your belief systems? Are they dark? Are they outdated? Is it something you need to let go of? Are you too attached to your belief systems? Do they give you enough room for transforming your point of view? It's a big piece. If you're dealing with people from other countries, other places, the Scorpio moon could also illuminate that connection as well. That'd be a tough, like if you're involved with somebody from another country, that you had the Scorpio moon going through your 9th house, that'd be tough because it would certainly bring up some deep, intense, profound kind of emotion that, in the moment, unless you're having an X-rated relationship with Skype or Zoom, it could be a bit difficult to resolve. In the 10th house, the transiting Scorpio moon has you thinking about your career, what's going on, and sort of, again, the darkness. You can get involved with a lot of kind of interesting emotions with Scorpio moon in the 10th house around other people, covetousness, what people want, desire, to what end they want it. You may yourself see a reflection in these other people. It's quite possible. Scorpio moon in the 12th house, you're dealing with friends, groups, associations, hidden agendas, both in the workplace and the 11th house, you can see hidden agendas illuminated, points of power illuminated, things along those lines. And then Scorpio moon in the 12th house, well, it's what comes out of the psyche and just out of the blue, right? All of a sudden you're dealing with intensity, some kind of emergent energy, emergent kind of information that just comes right out of the blue. So these are just a snapshot of what you can experience with Scorpio, this Scorpio moon tonight and tomorrow. And the thing of it is that it triggers things, right? You could have the experience, you could have the action, you can have the revelation, and it triggers things. It doesn't, just doesn't, like, it can bring things up, and that's the way it is. We got Mercury in Mercury in Aries at 12 degrees. I think we're finally out of the shadow at 19. Venus is in Gemini in 6 degrees. So isn't it interesting? I think this love affair between Trump and Kanye went into effect when Venus went right into Gemini. I think that's when it happened. Maybe Heather, who's a great astrological sleuth, can figure it out. And she could look at when Kanye burst back on the scene. I'll bet you it was like in the first 5 degrees of Venus and Gemini, which would make a lot of sense. Mars is in Capricorn, and it is right there in conjunct Pluto. How's that felt for people? It's been intense for me. Let me check in with you in the chat room. How have you guys been over the last 3 weeks with the Mars Pluto conjunction? Time for a dog. Yeah, it is. You're right. It is time for a dog. It's killing me. It's been intense for me. I'm telling you, second house. Been looking at a lot of my choices and resources and all kinds of. Can you talk more about the 8th house, 12th house? I'd be happy to talk about the 12th house. The 12th house is a really interesting house. Royal baby born with Mars Pluto conjunction. It's probably the Antichrist. You know what's really interesting too about this whole duality trip? Because we had this royal baby born, and then we had this other boy, Alfie. Have you guys seen, like, Alfie, who couldn't get treated? Have you seen that? The Rosemary's Baby dress. That's right. She was wearing the Rosemary's Baby dress. So the kid was born, what's his name? Louis Arthur or something like that? What's the name of the baby? Born with Mars Pluto conjunction. And then they had this little boy, Alfie, who had this rare disease. And Italy, yeah, the Alfie story is horrible. So Italy said that, we'll take him, right? We'll take him. People in the United States wanted to take him. They wanted to offer, really experimental treatment for this little boy. And the National Health in England said no. The parents wanted to take him. They said no. And they took him off of the feeding tube, right? They starved the kid to death. My nephew was stabbed to death on 420. Oh, man, I'm sorry to hear that. Shit. For as both conjuncted my moon. That is intense, man. I'm sorry, Zach Line. What do you say to something like that, man? I just, we live in a cruel world. Totally cruel world. Yeah, they wouldn't release this Alfie. So what do we have? We have Alfie who dies, and then we have the royal born who lives, right? Again, that gets into this whole duality thing we've been going through. Bill Cosby, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Kanye West, Alfie and, the royal born. I think his middle name is Arthur. So definitely condolences. That's such a hard thing. One of the things that, who was it? Was it Lynn who came in last week and said we're at the end of the Kali Yuga? I hope so. I think we can only take so much suffering. This is difficult to deal with. Really difficult. And then we're fucking around with all these little gotcha moments. It's just like, come on, let's get to it. If they took all their Lewis Mountbatten. Okay, there we go. Named after Lord Mountbatten. I think Arthur's in there somewhere too. But if we took this energy that we were just focusing on and gotcha, and did something, responsible with it, like take on chemtrails or war or, some other crap, we'd have a much better planet to live on. But that's why there are so many gotcha moments, because nobody knows what to do with their personal shit. It's true. I've been angry too. The anger stuff is I guess it's the explosiveness with the Pluto Mars conjunction. I would say yes to that. It's almost like that's underworld material, right? Student loan debt crisis. Mm-hmm. And we got teachers striking now too. And I for whatever it's worth, I predicted that back in the webinar on Capricorn. I said we're going to have strikes. Why did I see that? I could see it, like in the last degrees of Saturn and Sagittarius, the last degrees of any sign in a big transit. Last degrees, you can see what's happening because it's going to tell you what's going to happen for the next degrees. So I was paying attention. What did I see? I saw strikes happening. And here we are, school teachers striking. They're not going to be the last ones for a number of different reasons. Anyway, Zach Line, again, heart goes out to you, prayers. I hope you guys get through it. It's just such a hard thing to deal with. I can't even imagine. I want to talk a little bit about Chiron, because I had somebody send me an email about Chiron. And they were talking about how Chiron is, this is another Mars trip. Maury says, I probably know less of astrology than any of you here, but I will say this whole system is duality based. Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're in a time of duality magic, like dark duality magic. This you can clearly see it, what just took place, right? Kanye and Trump. They're both Geminis. They're both Geminis. Kanye and Trump. Dragon power, right? The two Bills, Cosby and Clinton, black and white. Kanye, Trump, black and white, right? Lefty. And then we have the Royal and Alfie. I'm sure I could find a few more, but we're in a time of serious duality, dark magic. It's a magical operation to flip the whole thing upside down. It's what it is. And in between duality, what do they have? They have a torsion field. You ever get two magnets and you flip them around and do this? What do you feel? Yeah. You feel that torsion field, the thing that's in between. Boy. Anyway, we're going to keep it up. So I want to talk about North and South Korea. Tony, exactly. Duality, North and South Korea, which we've talked about. We talked about that last week in terms of Chiron, North and South Korea. You're absolutely right. Another duality piece. You see how all the pieces are being put together here? Duality, 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 duality. Absolutely. So I wanted to talk about Chiron again, because we got into a really good discussion around Chiron. And somebody sent me an email, and it was about how Chiron is conjunct their Mars. Speaking of Mars, Mr. Insistent, he's got to be in Aries, right? He's got to be in Aries. Yeah. I had an interesting moment with a goat today. Did you see that? Did you see that? I said I had an interesting moment with a goat today. He said, "What? That was really funny. That was so funny." Anyway, I had an interesting moment with a goat today because there's a lot of goats here in this town. And I was riding my bike and I saw these two goats. They were like, in the backyard or the side yard of this house. And so I rode up to this little fence, and I saw these goats, and I said, "Hey, do you have a message for me? You guys got something for me?" And they got up and they ran right over to me, and I started hanging out with these goats. And I had a really interesting moment with this one goat. They were really into like being petted and being affectionate, and it was interesting. I'd never like bonded with a goat like that before. And then the other goat was a younger goat and kind of like rammed its antlers against my hands. Anyway, it was a Mars and Capricorn, Pluto and Capricorn kind of moment with the goats. So anyway, let me get back to this Chiron piece. Is this going to get kinky with the goats? No, there's no. Goats are such a trip. I have had 2 experiences of goats speaking to me. Yet they are really something, man. Goats are definitely a trip. They're different. They're a different breed. They're a different animal. Absolutely. No, I just rode off after a while. So I got this email about Chiron, and the person said I have a Mars Chiron conjunction in my chart. And so what Chiron is doing is they have Mars, right, and Chiron's conjuncting Mars in their chart, and so they're looking at the choices that they've made, how they've used their will, and really because that's what Mars is, right? It's willpower, it's will, and the gist of it was that this Chiron conjunction was triggering this process about how they used their will, misused their will, subverted their will. And I thought about this and I looked at transiting Chiron in my chart and it's squaring my Mars. And I was having a very similar experience, very, very similar. to that. Like, and I've been looking at how I've used my will, made decisions, and made choices. So this is a really interesting time with Chiron and Aries, because we're all going to have some degree of that. We're all going to be looking, because Aries represents the activation of will, right? That's what it represents. And so when we have Chiron and Aries, we're going to look at, transiting Chiron, wherever it is in our chart, transiting through our chart, we're going to look at choices we made, for better or for worse. And we're going to have to deal with those choices. So it's kind of a big deal, you know? So wherever Chiron is showing up in your chart, look at where you've subverted yourself. Look at where you've sold yourself out. You know, wherever it's transiting, because it's going to give you, especially during the first 9 degrees, when it's in its first decan, right? In the Aries decan, you'll get insights. You'll get really profound insights. That's what I've been looking at the past weeks, really thinking through what the hell happened so far and how to move forward. Absolutely. You know, you look at Chiron and Aries in your 8th house. You look at, you know, your relationship with money, your relationship with sex, your relationship with, you know, your ancestors, your relationship with addiction, sometimes with the 8th house. On the descendant, you know, it's going to be about relationship to relationship. You know, do you assert your will too much? Do you subvert your will? What relationships have you chosen that have been dominant, where you've been dominated, or where you've tried to dominate, where really you just should have just shown up and been in the relationship? 6th house, it's about work. It's about work choices. You know, where have you chosen to work? The type of work you've done, the choices that you made in your work. This is a really interesting time. 10th house conjunct the sun. 10th house conjunct the sun. Look, where are you on your path? You know, are you over ambitious? Are you not, you know, ambitious and will directed enough? You know, only you can figure that out, right? Chiron in the 11th house, transiting Chiron through the 11th house is going to be friends and groups and associations. What are your choices around the friends that you've made or groups that you've joined? Did they, you know, add to your, I don't want to say power, but did they add to your experience? Did they empower you? Did you empower them? These early degrees are going to be really interesting, because ultimately what we want to do is we want to be able to heal that. And, you know, and we can get there through what? Through the first decan. And the second decan after that is what? It's Leo. And Leo's the heart. You know, so if you've experienced some kind of wounding, you know, then we can go through. The second decan is going to be, you know, it's not going to be for a while, but it will happen. Someone who caused problems for me had her Saturn exactly on my Chiron. That's almost karmic. You know, anytime you get into Saturn, man, you're dealing with big forces, larger than, you know, you're dealing with time. You know, and that's not to say that you know you've done anything wrong, but you're dealing with big energy with Saturn when it's on one of your planets. Chiron is squaring my 4th house cusp. Very profound healing, squaring family. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this Chiron experience is really interesting. Like, it is alive. You know, it is happening, and you can find out a lot about, you know, what's going on. You know, Chiron in my 5th house. I could get into that right now, but I'm, you know, I don't want to. That's a heavily stacked deck for me. But that goes back to childhood. It goes back to love affairs. It goes to children. You know, for me. You know, and so it's kind of a big deal. And but really for me, it's the square, the Chiron square to Mars. I've had yin and yang relationships with aspects to my North Node. Chiron in the 12th. Ooh. Transiting Chiron in the 12th. Well, you know, that can be a really you know, Chiron in the 12th can be really powerful. Really, really powerful and otherworldly. I mean, if you have it in your natal chart, that's otherworldly. That like, because when the 12th house just sends you out, right? Sends you out to where you came from. You know, Chiron in the 12th house is you know, it's sending you out in a very kind of unique way. It allows the person to get in touch with deep, deep vulnerability and understand that they're not really alone, or they shouldn't be alone in this lifetime and in this realm, right? I know people have Chiron in the 12th and they've had profound spiritual experiences when they are actually engaged in some kind of fellowship, like they go to church. And I know it sounds really mundane, but it happens and it's true. All of a sudden now, they're not alone anymore. They don't feel like their Chiron is isolated. So they have this sense of greater communion. And that could happen in a physical sense, it could happen in a metaphysical sense, in an esoteric sense. I know there's some people who have really profound contact with, ancestors and guides and stuff like that. Chiron can be very instructive with that kind of relationship in some ways. So, one of the things that you really want to try to uncover with Chiron in the 12th is the sense that you're not alone, because it's an Aries, right? And Aries is always about doing things on your own, individual, will directed. You're searching for a greater spiritual source with Chiron in the 12th house. And when you find it, it can be profound. The transit of Chiron through the 12th hopefully will bring that to you. You may have to go through some isolation though. And that's how life is. Maurice says the million question, does the zodiacal placement in your charts as they are right now? Yeah, so we're talking right now. I'm talking about, like, I'm bouncing back and forth more between transits of Chiron and then placements of Chiron in a particular house. So that's kind of what I was getting into here. But I think this can be a really powerful time with Chiron and Aries. Again, I'll share something with you from my esoteric past. I used to hang out with this older guy who was like my first spiritual teacher, and he was so far out there. It was such a weird situation. I worked at this apartment complex in California, and it was all singles. It was like back in the day where they had singles apartment complexes. So people would go there, they were single, and they'd go there to like hook up, right? That's what it was like in the 70s. I was a young guy, and I was like the assistant director, recreation director. And it was crazy. It was a time with cocaine, quaaludes, and singles. And that's what the demographic was of the place. So I got to know a lot of the residents. And one of the people that I got to know was this older guy who was not part of the demographic at all. It was just a place for him to live. And he became my first spiritual teacher in a very, unusual way. I mean, he'd show up on Sundays, and we'd go over to we'd be in the rec room, and we'd watch In Search Of, with Leonard Nimoy. And so he'd get into all this kind of paranormal, esoteric stuff. And he'd start like throwing stuff at me. I'm like, whoa, where's that coming from? Where did you learn that? I think it was 19 or 20 at the most. And then he started to give me printouts from Edgar Cayce and Ruth Montgomery. And then he started to tell me stuff, which was like, way up here. It took me years to kind of like understand it and figure it out. But one of the things that he told me was that, we talked about free will. This gets back to Chiron and Aries because we're dealing with will, right? And he said, there's no such thing as free will. And I said, what? He said, there's no such thing as free will. So what do you mean? He says, well, what happens is we expend our will all the time, then we realize it just doesn't work. But what happens is that after that, you get in touch with your true will, which is different than your free will. And I've talked about this before. And I thought that's really interesting. And it took me quite a few years to understand the difference between the two. And then the true will has to do, like in his mind, and I think in the esoteric brain, this God's will, right? So what you do is you link with your higher self, your higher will, which connects you to God's will. It's like stages, up, 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 up. And once you get there, you're in the tractor beam, right? You're in the tractor beam. And when you're in the tractor beam, boom, you know what to do, you know where to go. And there's no kind of, deviation or derivation. Some people might call that like Christ consciousness or surrendering to Jesus as Lord. Maybe that's their version of it. But yeah, so with Chiron and Aries, one of the things that might be instructive for us is to explore that relationship and to look at in our lives where we've used free will and we fucked up. And that maybe, just maybe, if we calm down and settle and reflect and really attempt to get in touch with that higher will, then all of a sudden our lives can open up in a different direction. And I've had a number of experiences like that in my life. And I've also struggled and I've gone back into this notion of free will at times. And what happens when you struggle is you get conflict and things don't work. So this is a whole process of surrender in a lot of ways. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, you know. So perhaps on this Scorpio moon, you may want to take that into account because we can look at what's interesting is that Mars used to be the ruler of Scorpio until they discovered Pluto and then said, here, you go hang out over there for now. So when we get into a Scorpio moon, we are essentially also having a discussion to some degree about Scorpio's relationship to Mars and its origination. So yes, when we uncover the moon or we unearth the moon with moon in Scorpio, we're dealing also about the emotional intent of the will. Okay, it's just something to ponder, really ponder, and because when it happened for me in my life in my early 20s, because I had a moment in my early 20s which was pretty dark, and I said, hey, look, get me out. I took the elevator down. I took Prince's elevator down. I said, hey, get me out of here. I'll do whatever you want. Just change my life. And from that point forward, my life did change. What was really interesting is that the guy who was my teacher gave me this book, which I had, and I've talked about this story before. I saw this book when he gave it to me, and it was the title of the book was, My Will by the Lord Himself. And I looked at this and I'm like, whoa, I'm not ready for that book. And I knew that. Put it up on my bookshelf. Then after I had this, elevator in the basement kind of moment, I got lifted up, said, I'm going to take this book and I'm going to read this book. So I started to read the book and it changed my life. It changed my life significantly. And I started to live from that place of the higher will. And my life began to work in ways like I can't even begin to tell you. It's like incredible, really incredible. In fact, I remember one time, I'll just give you a little anecdote, was coaching a flag football team. And it was great. It was great fun. It was an after school program, which I was teaching. And this kid ran into one of my kids who was a bruiser, and he got his nose bloody and he was freaking out, totally freaking out. And I ran onto the field and I got right in touch with God. Right. And I wasn't a Christian or anything. Like I wasn't going to church, but I got right in touch with God at that moment. I said, God, help me out here. Help me out with this boy. Help me do whatever I can in this moment. And I did it. And I put my hand on this kid's head in a way that was like kind of, not really ostentatious. You know what the kid did? He stopped crying. He stopped crying. Swear to God. And then the blood began to stop. And that moment flipped, right? And I know that I couldn't have done that in that moment without this level of kind of divine intervention and this connection to the higher will. It was incredible, right? So anyway, unfortunately, I strayed into the dark lands for a while. Now I'm working my way back. I'm doing penance. I'll get there again. I promise you. Shall we get into Bernie Madoff's chart? You want to get into Bernie Madoff's chart? You want to check it out? Did you see the link I put in there? Speaking of will. So I'll put it in here again so you can look at it and you can play with it. Let me find it one more time. Here we go. This is Bernie Madoff's chart. Let's do this one more time. There you go. If you want to follow along at home. What was the book called? The book was called My Peace by the Lord Himself. I doubt you'll find any copies of that book. So what happened is that like that book initiated me into this whole esoteric system called the 12 rays, which was 5 rays above the 7 rays, right? So it was a lot of I am stuff, which what I had no idea of at the time. So I got this very esoteric kind of initiation, and that's where it took me. And I was out there, man. My grandparents. I stayed with my grandparents for a while in my 20s. They had these lead glass bottles, red, yellow, blue, green, and I would take and I'd fill them up with water and I'd stick them outside, and I'd have the sun go through the colored glass of these bottles. And so when I drank the water, I was like, drinking the specific ray, the specific esoteric ray, right? So I'd be drinking the blue ray that was charged by the sun with the water, all that stuff. It was, I don't know what my family was doing at that time. The Peaceful Warrior, Dan Millman. Dale Millman's got a really good book on numerology, by the way. If you guys ever wanted to check that out, it's a really good book on numerology. All right, let's get into Bernie Madoff's chart. So as people know, Bernie Madoff did a lot of people wrong. He he stole a lot of money from people. Now, I actually know people who lost money to Bernie Madoff, believe it or not, and they lost the money through the Wilpon family. And this is not, I'm not going to tell you who they are, but it's no secret that the Wilpon family, who are the owner of the New York Mets, were big supporters of Bernie Madoff. And it's like if the Wilpons are making money with Madoff, then maybe we should be. And these people were ardent Met fans. So I guess they could call it the Will Ponzi scheme. But so Madoff, as everybody knows, got into deep shit, and theoretically he is still in prison right now. And his son, unfortunately, committed suicide 2 years after Madoff was convicted and went to prison. And the heavy part about it is that he'd been, living a lie. And so what happened was he told his 2 sons. And his sons actually, I think, were involved with the business. They turned him in. If you look at his chart, you'll see that he has Pluto in Cancer in his chart, and it's ingressing into the 12th house in Leo. And that's children. So if you also look at that Pluto, which is at 27 degrees, it's also in square with his midheaven. And his midheaven was at Taurus 22. And then it was also in square with, it is in square. Well, not really. It's his ascendant that's in square with his midheaven. My apologies. And his ascendant, which is in square with also Venus, which is also in Taurus at 29 degrees. So he's using relationships in a not so great way. Now his Pluto is in square with Mercury in his chart in Aries. And if you look at Mercury, it's in the 8th house. And so we're dealing with other people's money, right? That's the 8th house. And he has Saturn in the 8th house as well, also in Aries. Again, other people's money. It's a very wide square to Pluto, but it's more Mercury that's squaring Pluto. So one could, I guess, make a case here for some hidden deviance with that Mercury-Pluto square. That's like covetousness, right? Like, Pluto brings out obsession. It brings out obsession. It brings out obsession and compulsion. And with Mercury squaring Pluto, it's not, you're going to go over it again and again and again and again and again until you get unwound, which is what happened with Madoff. He had a lot of Taurus in his chart, moon in Taurus, sun in Taurus, and look at his moon. It's at that balsamic moon. And that's not quite, that's kind of like what we saw last week with John Krasinski's moon, which was in Libra. But with Krasinski, it's relationship and balance. With Bernie Madoff, it's money, it's hard assets. So what he probably should have done was practice more letting go. But there was compulsion here, and the compulsion is Mercury in the 8th house squaring Pluto. And that's divisible by it's separated by 1 degree. Okay. The other thing that's interesting about his chart is that we see 28 Leo. So he wanted to be a big deal. People have Leo ascending, want to be a big deal. I'm not sure if he was overcompensating, but he might have been. With the midheaven, and certainly with Venus, and Venus with Gemini, he has Mars in Gemini. Venus at 29 Taurus, and he has Mars in Gemini at the midheaven. What is Gemini? It's like 2 different people, right? It's like 2 different people. It's like 2 different, operations going on. It brings us right back to duality. And what is Mars doing? Well, it's actually in square, believe it or not, with Jupiter. It's in square with the ascendant. By degree, that's a 6-degree square to the ascendant. It's a 6-degree square with the descendant. And so Mars was driving those things intensely, right? And then you have Neptune in the 1st house. It's kind of low. It's getting close to the 2nd. But when people have Neptune in the 1st house, what are we talking about? Some level or form of deception. And look where that south node is, man. 26 degrees. South node, Taurus, midheaven, assets. But what's interesting is that his true node is in Scorpio, which is other people's money. It's other people's resources. He was in the right business. Believe it or not, Bernie Madoff was in the right business. The problem was, so he has that Mercury square to Pluto. And then that south node up at the top of the chart at 26. The south node is conjunct Venus. So what was he doing? He was deceiving people. Deceiving his relationships, right? Connections. When Bernie Madoff was convicted, let's look at the timeline of Madoff. Let's get into this a little bit. I have the ephemeris open. Give me 1 sec. Let me find this thing. Is that it? No. Get rid of that. Here it is. It's right here. No, that's it. Hold on. No, that's not it. Oh, here it is. Well, sort of. Okay. All right. So Madoff, let me read you the story here. Real brief. Former American businessman, stockbroker, investment advisor, and financier. He's the former non-executive chairman of the NASDAQ stock market, the admitted operator of a Ponzi scheme that is considered to be the largest financial fraud in U.S. history. Madoff aroused the suspicion of his 2 sons, Mark and Andrew, when they learned he intended to pay out bonuses 2 months early. When they confronted him on 10 December, they confronted him 2008, he confessed that his entire career was a fraud. Wow. He was arrested the following morning at his Manhattan home because his kids turned him in. So we're going to look at that 10 December 2008 date right now. Find out what was going on in the life of Bernie Madoff. We're going to use the ephemeris. We're going to do some forensics to see what was happening. Okay, let me go back here. So December 10th in 2008. Guess where the moon was? Without even looking, any guesses where the moon was? Madoff, right? Bernie Madoff, I know. Isn't that trip? Where was the moon? Anybody know? Any guesses? Close. Flip it. The moon was in Taurus. The moon was in Taurus. The moon was, when he confessed, the moon was going across his south node. Okay, that's interesting from that day in that perspective. Okay, so keep in mind that is a mutable day, and Bernie Madoff's 4 points on his chart are all fixed. It's got Leo on the ascendant, Scorpio in the 4th, Aquarius in the 7th, and then Taurus on the midheaven. So what sign is this? Is going to be Sagittarius time, right? December 10th. What modality is Sagittarius? Any guesses? Real easy. What is it? What is Sagittarius? Sagittarius is mutable, right? Thank you, Farrah. It's mutable. So we have mutability coming into play. It is law too, Paula. That's true. That's one of the definitions. It is mutable, right? So we have mutability coming into a fixed chart, which means it's going to change. It's going to change the fixity. The alchemical property is change. So again, let's look at the chart, or here he comes again. So the sun at that time on December 10th was at 18 degrees Sagittarius. And then when we look at Bernie Madoff's chart, where do we see that come into play from a mutability perspective? Well, it doesn't really quite hit his Mars because it's about a 14-degree separation, correct? But it's in the 4th house. And he's dealing with what? His home environment. That's where he exposes everything. Now, what's really interesting, you look at that chart, what do we see there? We see Black Moon Lilith at 17 degrees. So the sun was conjunct Black Moon Lilith that day in his home. And that's shadowy, emotional content. And then obviously with Sagittarius, we're dealing with the law, which is true. Let's find out what else was going on that day. We have the moon in Taurus, which we talked about. It's kind of a big deal, cruising across his south node. Mercury was in Sag, and that was at 26. Then we have Venus in Aquarius at 2. And we have more mutability. Oh, look at this now. We have Mars at 17, Sagittarius. And his true node is at 17, Sagittarius. So you had a Mars conjunction with Black Moon Lilith right there in his 4th house in the home. Dark, shadowy nature, material exposed in the home on December 10th. Could you imagine listening to that conversation? Yeah. All right, let's see what else we have here. Jupiter was in Capricorn at that time at 20 degrees. Now that's cardinal. Here's what we're looking for. We're looking at Saturn at 21 degrees. What sign? Virgo. Okay. Where's Bernie Madoff's Neptune? It's at 18, Virgo. Saturn, Neptune conjunction, 1st house, right? Saturn comes in. Now, you can make a case that the kids knew, right? That they knew what was going on. It wasn't like it was a revelation. So Madoff had Saturn going through his 1st house and then conjuncting Neptune in his chart when all that happened. So the Saturn-Neptune conjunction basically flushed him out. That's what happened. With Saturn going, this is a big deal, by the way. Very, very big deal. Significant. Now, Saturn was in a wide square with what? Well, it was with Mars at 17 degrees, right? Saturn at 21, Virgo, Mars at 17. And Mars, by the way, is moving towards Saturn. It's getting closer to the square, not further away. So the elements here on this day are intense for Madoff. Very intense. then you could actually see, like, the hand of revelation, at work. Let me give you a couple of more interesting dates here with Madoff, at least that I thought were. Okay, so he confesses on March 12th, correct? Okay. I'm sorry, confesses on December 10th. He was held under house arrest until 12 March 2009. That's another mutable day. And that's Pisces. And 12 March is going to be right around the sun opposing his Neptune. And then the next big day is the 29th of June, which puts us into Gemini territory, right? 29th of June. Actually, let me just think now. 29th of June. No, that's Cancer. It's Cancer territory, 29 June. It's early Cancer. So what are we talking? We're talking like 4 degrees Cancer is when he was sentenced to 150 years. And then the tragedy was that his son hanged himself on December 11th, which was the 2-year anniversary of his father's arrest. Totally tragic. I don't know about the son thing, Madoff knew where a lot of bodies were buried. And he was, trust me, he knew a lot of bodies were buried. And I think his son probably had some of that information as well. So 29 June, let's just go there. 29 June 2009. We get into the ephemeris here. Didn't waste much time getting to it with him, did they? So 29 June. Hold on. Why don't we get that? Why is that? Let's go back. Give me one sec. Okay, so 29 June 2009. Moon was in Libra. Mercury was in Gemini. And the sun was a Cancer at 7 degrees. So that's going to put, let's see, 7th house. 7, do we have any cardinal squares going on? Not really. What else is happening then? Give me a sec here. Saturn's still in Virgo on 29 June, 16 degrees. And that's going to put it at 16. Just, again, right on his Neptune. Right on his Neptune. Interesting. So Saturn in Virgo exposed Bernie Madoff as it started to go through his first house. Normally, that Saturn first house transit can be quite good if you've done the work prior to that. And that's Saturn going through the 12th house. Saturn going through the 12th house is the dredge of the last 30 years of a person's life. If Bernie Madoff had confessed when Saturn was on his Pluto and went to the cops or the authorities and confessed and didn't confess to his kids, he might have had a different trajectory. But he didn't. And he visited the sins of the father upon the son. They got some of the money back, not all of it. There was a large class action suit against both the New York Mets and Fred Wilpon and the Madoffs. But not all the money's there. They got some of it back. It's tragic, but it's a story of greed. And really what he was really trying to do, he was trying to be a big deal. The 28-degree Leo ascendant, squaring his midheaven in Taurus, he was trying to be a big deal. This is a guy that had been the head of NASDAQ He had climbed the ladder. So he had a compulsion, which is that Mercury-Pluto square in his chart. He had a compulsion. It wasn't enough. Just wasn't enough. And the unfortunate thing is that he's not alone. There's a lot more of that kind of crime that's gone on for a very, very long time and still happens. Let me check in with the chat room here, see how you guys are doing. Let's see. We go. We got a Brazilian. Hey, what's happening? Illusions hit the wall. I heard J.P. Morgan, GS, and governments knew what Madoff was doing. They let him go for years. Of course, they profited off of him. They were making money off. Of course, they knew. They knew they were making money. It's just like what happened with the mortgage crisis. Same deal, right? Well, we've got Jupiter in Scorpio retrograde. Maybe we'll have a few more of these revelations as Jupiter continues its backward track and backward trip in Scorpio. It's an interesting transit, Jupiter in Scorpio, isn't it? Very interesting. Okay, listen, I think we're going to get out of here. Go outside and go check out that moon. Get into moon. Feel it, get into it, experience it. You don't want to be holed up in your house watching me all night. There's a whole universe out there. Okay. Subprime mortgages are back. That is not a good thing. Holy shit. Did we learn the first time? Jupiter just below it. Despite amazing show despite. And you're welcome. We try to balance things out here. Mix up a little dark with light and get through the darkness. There's a lot of positivity going on right now. There really is. This is a powerful time. We can untie some things, and we can figure out what's going on and untie some knots, some cords. This is a really, really good time. So hang in there. Stay in touch with your humanity. By the way, I have a great film. Thanks. I have a great film to recommend. I'm kind of a TCM guy. It's called Executive Action, and it has to do with business, and it's with one of my favorite actors, two of my favorite actors, William Holden and Frederick March. It's a film from the 1950s, and it has to do with the death of a CEO. Just watch that movie, number one, because you'll see a completely different picture of America. Like that place isn't even around anymore. And when you see the movie, you'll know what I'm talking about. And not only that, but the message of the movie. The message of the movie is something that we need to pay more attention to, which has to do with people and not the bottom line. So check it out, Executive Action. It's on TCM, and I think they're running it, but it's also in their streaming. Go check it out and find it. You can find me tomorrow on 15 Minutes of Flame, and we'll talk more about what's going on in the world. And sort through this stuff. We'll sort through it. We'll get to the other side. In the meantime, we'll find out more about our humanity, our divinity, and link them both up, and everybody else will be better off for it. All right? Love you all. Take good care, and I'll see you tomorrow. Ciao.